It's That Kevin Show.
See, I knew it.
Come on, Kev. What's a few classified documents between friends?
I told you all the time. I knew it. I knew he had some too.
Here he is. That Kevin McCullough.
Ladies and gentlemen, my next guest is no stranger to those of you who have caught us on the Salem News Channel, but for those of you listening on some 300-plus radio stations, you may or may not hear the voice of my next guest on a regular basis. He fills in for some of the people heard on many of those stations during the week, but he's also a legend, not in his own mind, in his own town of the great DFW Metroplex, and you have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to call it that. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Mark Davis. Hello, Mark.
Kevin, thank you very much for that kind intro. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So I don't know if I ever made mention of this to you. In fact, I think outside of just a couple of SNC things, this is the first time we've ever kind of really interacted. And I'm excited to have you on the show. But there was a fellow who used to produce radio for me years ago by the name of Gary Vilipiano, and he was a WABC guy back when you were working at the other station there in Texas and sometimes doing network stuff. And I'm just curious if you have memories of the V-Man, because he used to sing your praises long before I ever had the chance to meet you.
I appreciate it enormously. And I think the best I ever heard of that was secondhand, because I certainly know the name, but I don't know that we have ever met. It's an odd and incestuous world, as you know, because I was at WBAP for 18 years, been here in Salem World for 12, put those together, and coming up in March, I'll have 30 years here in the Metroplex.
And you barely look old enough to be that old.
I know. How is that? I started when I was 10. How in the world is that possible? Radio keeps you young if it doesn't kill you. And so from the ABC people and consultants, and it was just a crazy corporate world of people, and corporate radio gets a bad rap, and sometimes it deserves it, but it depends on what the corporation is and who the people are. And I've had a real great lucky run of being in the company of, under the tutelage of, under the guidance of, and being the property of some pretty smart people. So I'm very blessed.
It's very interesting to hear that side of the story, because I think this was back in the day when ABC was trying to figure out who was going to fill in for Rush and kind of maybe get that time slot and so forth. And from the ABC network offices in New York, the V-Man, as I oft referred to him, was a Mark Davis advocate, and he thought that you deserved the shot that they ended up giving to Hannity, because he thought you were just a better radio guy altogether. And I want to talk to you about this, because I had Gallagher on the show probably in the third or fourth week of us doing the That Kevin show on the network now, and we were talking about old-fashioned radio guys that brought coffee to people when they were an intern and worked their way up from sweeping floors and doing weekend shifts and, you know, bouncing from market to market and doing the stuff to come up through the ranks. There's not a lot of those that are at some of the more peak places in our industry right now. And I'm wondering your thoughts on what you feel like they might have missed out on.
Only everything. Who's going to be doing the energetic talk shows 30 years from now? Now, is there young talent? Are there folks who are, slogging away in the salt mines right now who might be, 30, which I was when I got my first major market break in Washington, D.C.? I suppose there are, but the first problem is there are so many fewer jobs. The satellite-driven networks, and as a Salem employee, I'm a huge fan of at least one satellite-driven network. And here at 660 AM, The Answer, I'm the morning show, and then we're well served. We're well served by Hugh Hewitt before me, Mike Gallagher afterward, Dennis Prager after that, Seb Gorka, Officer Tatum, et cetera. So that's great, but ultimately what it's meant is that in a market like Dallas-Fort Worth, where I arrived in 1994, there were probably 10 or 11 guys doing major day part shows across 3 or 4 news talk stations. Those days are gone. You ever get people, Kevin, who ask you, hey, I'm thinking about getting into talk radio. Good luck with that, because the local marketplace, the farm team, the AAA ball has largely evaporated. So, podcasts create opportunities for everybody. I'm not in a bummer about the state of spoken word broadcasting. I think our future could be very, very bright, especially in the Salem environment where we're doing like everything. But as far as traditional radio, and I very much sound like the boomer in my front yard shaking my fist in a cloud.
That's okay, man. I'm right there with
Right.
you.
Starting in a small market. I mean, I was a news guy in Charleston, West Virginia, had my first talk show in Jacksonville, Florida, then Memphis, then Tampa, then Washington, and then here.
Wow.
That's hard to replicate now, not because I'm so special, but just because the pathway doesn't seem to be as well paid.
That makes the last 30 years of you being in Dallas sound much more restful, which I just picture every time that move happens. It's all the boxes and all the stuff all over again. We're speaking with Mark Davis, who you sometimes see on programs like SNC Tonight or filling in for Dennis Prager, a number of other talent across the board. And of course, almost every morning, he's with Mike Gallagher on the M&M Experience, where they kind of cross-talk between Mike's national show and Mark's morning show there in Dallas. And Dallas was a very good market to me, Mark. I grew up on the west side of Fort Worth. I remember listening when my parents would tell me to go to bed. I remember listening to my AM radio under my covers, WBAP, the great Hal J and others calling the play-by-play Ranger games on AM 820, and hearing Mickey Rivers getting ready to steal a base and Nolan Ryan striking out some legendary batter. And the way the spoken word brought life into my brain and allowed me to see things that I couldn't see in any other way. I never gave it any thought as to whether or not I was going to work in the field. I didn't know if I would. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But man, did that impact me in terms of the power of the spoken word. And I'm curious, Mark, because there's a lot that is going to be said this year in spoken word about the future of our country and the elections that are just in front of us. And I'm a faithful Gallagher, Mark Davis, M&M Experience listener. I catch you guys almost every day. What are your thoughts? What are your honest, words, if you will, about where we're at as a country and what this next election means to us?
The first thing I want to address is there are people who will say we've never been so divided. I think maybe we have. I'm old enough at least to remember being a kid in the 60s. There was that thing called the Civil War 100 years prior to that. I think division, deep, sharp division, is something we've experienced as a country before. But we've just never done it in the era of these cell phones, podcasts, social media. Everybody has a platform. And by the way, that's a good thing. It's very democratic with a small d. So many people with so many opportunities to say things means there are millions of people with an opportunity to just fuss and moan and be mean to each other. It'll bring out what a society is. And what our society has always been has been some people who are good and have goodwill and have a constructive desire to engage, and other people who are just jerks. It seems that all the jerks have Twitter platforms, and some of them have cable news shows. So in the midst of all that, you're just going to have all kinds of anger and angst, a dominant media culture that absolutely despises conservatives. Conservatives have every right to fight back. I've always tried to be, to borrow a Mike Gallagher term, the happy warrior, to constructively engage with callers who disagree, elected officials who disagree, so that we can get back to that time. Right now, it's like, I disagree with you, so you must be stupid or you must be evil. I want to get back to a time where I disagree with you. Let me tell you what I think. You tell me what you think, and we'll let an audience figure out who's right. I miss those days, and I hope they can be retrieved.
He's Mark Davis. I'm Kevin McCullough. It's That Kevin Show, and we couldn't be happier than to have you come back right here to Times Square when we continue.